Hello Fern Creek class of 2020. Mr. Tennyson here, back with another video in our money series for Adulting 101. And in this one we're going to talk about freedom from debt, and that's why you need a budget. So we'll go ahead and get started. This might be a longer video. I may have to cut this one into separate videos, so we'll kind of see how it goes. This is our first take. I want you to think back to our very first video where we talked about how wealth is not about income, right? Wealth is about what we do with the income that we have, and having an adequate amount of savings to prioritize the right things. We also talked about how wealthy people spend their money, right? Wealthy people spend their money on long-term essential goals like freedom from debt, freedom from external control. We already talked about being free from work, thanks to the power of compound interest. And then the last thing they might spend their money on is their children's education, or just their children in general, as far as long-term essential goals are concerned. The two we're going to talk about in this video are freedom from debt and freedom from external control. And the other thing that we're going to do after this video is I want to give you some practical application for how you actually go about building a budget, which is really key for achieving those first two goals there. And remember that wealthy people also spend their money on things that they want, right? It's not about living a life in total austerity where you never get to buy anything you want. It's just that those things that you want never impact your regular savings toward your essential goals, or maybe it's just paying off debt, right? If you've accrued some consumer debt, you're going to stop, or you're going to bring that down to zero before you start to get back into things that you really want to have. And remember that preparing for freedom from work, right? Preparing for that that day whenever you decide you don't want to work anymore. And remember, that's not necessarily the day that you're so old you can't work anymore, right? We actually don't want that to be the case. We want to be prepared to be free from work anytime. In order to prepare for long-term and short-term savings, you need to do these three things. You need to have a deep understanding of your monthly income with a budget. You need to eliminate any consumer debt. Again, check out that credit card video on Mr. Alara's channel for more about that. And you need to build an emergency fund for those rainy days where something happens that you weren't expecting. We don't want to go into debt when we have emergencies, okay? So today we're going to talk about how we develop that deep understanding of our monthly income with a budget, and we're going to talk a little bit about building an emergency fund. First, let's talk about freedom from debt. Freedom from debt means that you can avoid a lifestyle that's guaranteed to generate consumer debt, right? That's the first thing that you want to do. You don't want to get into habits that lead to accruing consumer debt over time. If you can do that, you can generally avoid having to go through more difficult measures to get free from debt. And the earlier you think about this, the better in life, or the better off you'll be in life, I should say. Freedom from debt also means that all of your discretionary income is used on things that bring value, these assets that appreciate, and things that you really want. So you want to minimize the liabilities that you have in life, and you want to increase the number of things that are going to make you money, right? Those are your appreciating assets. Those are things like a 401k, a Roth IRA, and then if you've got those things sorted out, you can start to spend some money on taxable investments like index funds, stock holdings, that kind of thing. Again, it's also about the things that you really want. Part of having a budget is starting to realize what it is you really want to have fun with. And I think that's a really valuable thing to know in life. So let's talk about what debts are worth it. Let's look at a series or a set of loans, right? A set of borrowed money that might be acceptable to an expensive consumer mindset, right? We've talked about the difference between having an expensive lifestyle and having a wealthy lifestyle. So what kind of loans are acceptable to someone with an expensive lifestyle, right? Well, we'd say the normal things like a home, education, and car, but then we've got all these other things on here that maybe don't make sense, right? A washer and dryer, yeah, you got to have one of those probably, right? Or at least some way to access one. But do you need a motorcycle? No. Do you have to put a vacuum on loan? Well, you shouldn't have to. But the truth is that people with a mindset that leads them to living an expensive lifestyle, they'll put any of these things on loan. Let's look at some examples. Here's a 2018 Subaru BRZ. Now, if you're a young person and you like to go fast, you might think, man, this is the perfect car for me. It's rear-wheel drive, it's got a stick shift, it's pretty sporty. This is an awesome vehicle. But the thing is, it's a luxury, right? This is a luxury car, and even though a Subaru, you might not think Subaru luxury car. Well, just because it's not a BMW or a Lexus doesn't mean it's not a luxury, right? Because having a fancy car or having a sporty car, rather than a car that just gets you point A to point B, rather than having a car that's reliable, rather than having a car that's cheap, if you go above and beyond and you get something like this is a want, right? And it's a luxury. And we don't put luxuries on loan. We want to avoid any time in our life that we are tempted to put a luxury on a loan. We just don't want to do that. That's not a wealthy mindset. I want to take a look at some things that would happen if we purchase this car, right? So this car is listed at $25,990 on Carvana, which is a website you can just buy cars from and they'll deliver them to your house, okay? We would be paying $506 a month for 6 years on this car, right? But that's not really the worst part, right? Let's imagine that you could actually afford this monthly payment. You're going to be paying 10% interest every year on this vehicle as well. So you're going to be financing a total of $27,000 after all the fees and whatever else. But this actual number is not what you're going to end up paying. You'll be paying probably $30,000, $31,000 over time on this car that only costs $25,000 because your interest rate of 10% is so high. That's like the interest rate on a personal loan. Where does that interest rate come from? Well, it comes from the fact that you don't have a particularly high income, okay? You really can't afford a $25,000 car if you're on a $50,000 income, frankly. And your credit score is just okay, right? But a lot of times, young people, right, those people with low incomes and low credit scores, or just, starting out credit scores, minimal cash down, right, they're the kind of people that end up buying this kind of car. The person that could actually enjoy this car could buy it with cash and would probably take it to autocross to race it, right? That's the difference between a wealthy person buying this car and a young person buying this car. A young person buying this car will drive it around point A to point B. They'll go fast at stoplights, and they, typical young things, right? Typical young and immature things. But a wealthy person will take this and they'll be able to afford to put it on a track and race it and actually have a good time with it, which is a really expensive hobby. But again, if you've lived a wealthy life up to your 40s or 38, whatever it might be that you get this car, you can actually afford to race this thing, which is what it's meant to do. I'm really into cars, so I kind of go on a long tangent about that. But this is one of the debts that can impact your ability to save effectively so much. Your car decision is really important. So don't go crazy on your car purchase. Try to find something that's really reasonable. In fact, the average millionaire has never spent more than $25,000 on a vehicle. That might blow your mind a little bit if you've thought about, your perceptions of wealth up to this point. You've really thought about people that have an expensive lifestyle. Just because someone's buying a 3 Series, a brand new 3 Series, doesn't mean that they're necessarily wealthy. They just prefer to live expensively. The average millionaire has never spent more than $25,000 on their vehicle. Okay, here's another example of a useless debt we could find. Here's a brand new big TV, 4K 65-inch, LED, lots of marketing stuff going on there. And we could buy that TV for $41.67 a month with 24-month financing. Wow. Here's the deal. If you have to consider a monthly payment to purchase a new TV, you cannot buy that TV. You should not buy that TV. If you can't pay cash for it, you shouldn't buy it, frankly. Here's another example. I love playing guitar. Here's a guitar, a $4,000 guitar. I could buy it. Now, I could pay cash, or they're telling me, hey, you could also pay $83 a month for 48 months. I don't want to be tied up in payments for 48 months for a guitar that I don't need. I'd rather just save up and pay cash. You can even put shoes on loan. Look at this. As low as 0% APR for $120 a month for these $1,400 shoes. That doesn't make sense to me. And this was my favorite that I found. On Amazon, you can pay $15 a month for 6 months for a $90 microwave. That's a cool looking microwave, but I'm pretty sure that if I went to Goodwill or if I went to Walmart, I could find a microwave that was $30, which also would cook food partially effectively, just like all microwaves do. So the general idea here is that there are so many ways to accrue debts. And remember that a debt is simply a liability where you still owe money. If I pay cash for this guitar, I own it outright. I can do what I want with it. And it's not impacting my ability to save every month, right, on the things that are my priorities. What if you've accumulated all these things? This car at $500 a month, this TV at $41 a month, this guitar at $83 a month, these shoes at $120 a month. You've done all this, right? You've accrued all this and you're making these monthly payments. What happens when you lose your job? What happens when the income you're using to make that monthly payment goes away, right? Well, now that temptation to go into credit card debt with this stuff increases substantially. So the key is not to get into a lifestyle which is about accruing monthly payments and accruing debts. That's the kind of lifestyle that gets you into debt very quickly, gets you into consumer debt very quickly, is when you become addicted to just purchasing stuff because you can fit it into your monthly payment or into your monthly income. For a person with a wealthy mindset, these are the only debts that are really worth it. An education, a home, and a car, maybe. A lot of wealthy people like to just pay cash for their cars, and they buy cheap cars, like used Toyota Corollas and stuff. But there's variation there. Just like there's variation in what kind of home a person might want to live in, variation in what kind of education a person could get. At the same time, these are the three, I guess, fundamental, I would say, debts that most wealthy people think are okay to have. And education is always worth it, right? If you have to go into a bit of debt for an education, it's going to pay off more in the long term. Now, granted, you need to be smart about it, and you need to avoid getting into so much student debt that it will be difficult to ever get out of. But that can be done by taking advantage of your public school education, which hopefully you've done. And it can also be done by doing things like going to a community college first, or just making sure that you're taking advantage of the FAFSA, lots of stuff that you all have already, sort of been through as seniors, hopefully. And then your home, obviously, you want to try to live modestly. There's some rules for these. There's some percentages that we'll look at when we actually do our budget that we want to kind of follow as rules for how much debt we want to go into over these things, but that's for another moment. I want to take you back to these charts where we're looking at how we're distributing our income, right? And we looked at a person with an expensive lifestyle. They're spending 60% on their needs, 35% on their wants, and 5% on their savings. They're not making that savings a priority. And really, what I want to point out is that this person with an expensive lifestyle, their needs are pretty high. Really, you want your needs in life to not consume more than 50% of your income total. And what's happened here is that because this person has spent maybe even just more on a car than they really should have, these three fundamental debts in life can really make this blue section of the chart expand rapidly. And when that happens, you get locked in to these payments right here very quickly, right? You can't get student loan forgiveness, right? You always are going to have to pay off your student debts if you have them. It's really difficult to get out of a home payment because you're going to sign a lease, you're going to sign a mortgage, and then the barriers to getting out of that debt are tough. And then with a car, right, that's another debt that's hard to get out of. You can't really just up and sell your car. Yeah, you can go and trade it in, but that a lot of times that means you're taking on new debt, especially if you still owe more on the car than what it's worth. So those three debts right there, it's really important that when you make your choices about where you live, what you drive, and where you go to school, that you're wise, and that you really take time to think about not not living above your means. And again, this is the person with a well-balanced income. They've got 50% of their income going to their needs, 30% going to their wants, and 20% going to their savings. They can maintain this balance as they go through life. The next thing I want to talk about is freedom from external control. You should always be in control of your money, and your money should never be in control of you. When I talk about freedom from external control, when unexpected life events happen, you need to remain in control of your finances. Emergencies in life should not be a reason for us to enter into substantial debt, nor should they be things that cause us so much financial crisis that we have a hard time recovering from them. Additionally, freedom from external control means that your job, debts, etc. do not have total control over your life. And what I mean by that is that when you have a job, right, just because, let's say you are looking for a new job, or let's say you get fired, whatever it might be, there's going to be some flux in that job, that income, right? So if you're living paycheck to paycheck, then that job has a really strong control over your life. But if you've got 6 months of your paycheck saved, if you've got 6 months of expenses saved up because you're building an emergency fund like you should be, then you could quit that job anytime you wanted, right? If your boss becomes someone that you don't want to deal with anymore, if you have a better opportunity, but that opportunity won't be available for 2 months, whatever it might be, freedom from external control means that your job doesn't have total control over your life. But the truth is, 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So that means that 78% of Americans are beholden to their job for everything that they own, right? If their microwave's on loan, if their guitar is on loan, if their car is on loan, right? They're basically relying on their employer to keep paying for that thing. And I know that's kind of hard to wrap your head around. You're like, well, of course. I mean, they get paid by their employer. But if you're wise with your money, if you make the time to build an emergency fund, then you don't have to be reliant on your employer paycheck to paycheck, month to month, to pay for the things that you have, to meet the obligations that you have in life. But 78% of Americans live that way. And unfortunately, right, we've just had this terrible event with the COVID-19 pandemic, where 16, and now it's much higher now. So this I made this slide a little while ago, but over 30 million people have filed claims for joblessness. They filed unemployment over the past month or so, and that means those 30 million people, if 78% of them, which would be like 25 million, 23 million, something like that, if those people were living paycheck to paycheck, now they are completely reliant on an unemployment system to support them, and that unemployment system is so bogged down with requests for jobless claims and requests for money that they might not be getting that support. And so now they and their families are in a really tight and tough situation. That's really unfortunate. There are elements of that go back to income inequality, that go back to the fact that we are the wealthiest nation in the world, and yet we still have these sort of issues where we can't support those that are most in need. But honestly, if you are living in America and you want to secure your financial lifestyle, you have to be the one that makes that decision ultimately. You can look at that as an opportunity to grow and do the best thing for yourself, or you can look at that as an opportunity to be a victim. I think it's good to avoid that victimization as much as you can, because ultimately, when the rubber meets the road, you have to pay your bills. Ultimately, by being prepared with an emergency fund, by having a good budget, We can prevent ourselves from being controlled by our employer, by our bank, or by the unexpected life events that happen to all of us, right? We get sick, we get hurt, we get car issues, right? Or we get laid off. And by preparing, we can avoid these things causing so much anxiety and catastrophe in our ability to live a successful and happy life. How do we do that? It starts with having a budget. It starts with having control over your money and knowing exactly what your money is doing every month. So I want to talk to you briefly about 3 different types of budget. There are lots of different perspectives on budgets. You can find so many tools out there that can help you budget, from simple to complicated. But I just found that these 3, and I think these 3 are pretty common. So we'll talk about the pros and cons here as we go through these. The first is the 50-30-20 rule, or the 50-30-20 budget. And you actually have seen this several times before. It's the basic idea that you never want to spend more than 50% on your needs, your true expenses, your obligations. You spend 30% on your wants, and you spend 20% on savings. It's a pretty straightforward budgeting system, okay? You might keep track of this in different ways. You might have some kind of spreadsheet. You might have some kind of app that lets you keep track of this kind of stuff. But that's the 50-30-20 budget. There's also a savings first, spending first type of budget where with savings first, you are always saving 20% from your most recent income, and then you've got the remainder of your money to spend on really whatever you want, your needs or your wants. And then there's also the spending first, where you kind of spend your money up to a limit of 80%, and then you save after you've reached a spending limit. Those are two perspectives on that. They're pretty similar. I don't know what happened to my little... Okay, this is a little misleading. This is 80%, this whole thing. This is 20%. Sorry, that's messed up. Okay? Here's the issue. You guys know I love these pictures of things that we can't afford sometimes, but both of those budgets, what we often find ourselves doing when we have a budget that's not very in control, and neither of these are high control budgets, okay? We find ourselves getting into these situations where we do some mental financial gymnastics. And this is what happens. We walk into Best Buy and we are feeling impulsive. Humans are emotional beings, and we have a hard time governing the things that will bring us immediate satisfaction. And so let's say you've kind of had a bad day, and you know the newest Xbox is out, Xbox Series X here, and you know it's got this awesome game that you've been wanting to play. It's like the game you've got to play, and you say, you know what, today is the day I'm going to spend the $400 and I'm going to get this Xbox. But you don't have $400 cash available that you can just throw into an Xbox, and so you know you see on the price tag that you could buy this Xbox for $30 a month for 18 months or something like that, right? And you think to yourself, well, you know what? I could probably not go out to dinner with my friends at least once or twice a month, and I could have enough money for this Xbox. Great. So you get the Xbox. And then you say to yourself 2 weeks later, like, well, you know what? My girlfriend doesn't like it when I'm playing video games at night, so I need to get some good wireless headphones for this Xbox. And you go back to the store and you see, well, they got some nice wireless headphones, but they're $120. And you're like, but I could get these for $18 a month for 8 months. And, you know, I could probably eat at the drive-thru 2 less times, or maybe I could, you know, change my monthly payment on my phone bill. I could go with a cheaper phone provider. I've been wanting to do that anyway, right? And so you do these mental financial gymnastics and you end up buying the headphones too, right? We do this all the time when we don't have control over our money. Car dealerships, they're masters at doing this. Car salesmen are there to convince you that you can afford a monthly payment on a car that you really can't afford, right? These temptations are all around us all the time. And if you don't have tight control of your money, the truth of the matter is that these temptations will get to you, because we can always seem to afford, in our mind, another monthly payment. But when we have to think about it in terms of cash, that always seems a little scary. On the other hand, a person with a really great budget, a person that's living a wealthy lifestyle, they could pay cash for any of those things you want. In fact, they could pay cash for any of those things you want without even thinking about it. Because they've accrued such a high net worth, right, that buying that Xbox isn't even a blip on the radar to the total amount of money that they've got saved up. Buying those shoes isn't even a blip on the radar. For the really wealthy, right, buying that M2 right there, one of my favorite cars, is not a blip on the radar. That's a $60,000 vehicle. But for some people, that's such a small percentage of their net worth, they could go out and buy cash. And I told you before, we should never put luxuries on loan. And luxuries are really those things we want, but we really don't need and can't afford. And that's just something to think about. So I want to talk about the last budget. It's called a zero-based budget. And the philosophy is, how do I give every single dollar in my bank account today the most effective job for the future? And the thing that differentiates a zero-based budget is that it's truly a mindset, a high control mindset that never assumes you will have your next paycheck. If 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, they're in that mentality, right? Or they're in a situation where they can't avoid that, and that happens too, right? But for a lot of Americans, it's just a matter of being in this mentality that my paychecks will continue to come, so I will utilize every part of that paycheck for some expense that I want. But with a zero-based budget, you never have more money than what's in your checking account. And that's really powerful, because if you've only got $800 in your checking account, you only get to spend that money. But over time, what that leads you to do is build an emergency fund. Well, let me pause for a second. If you've got a zero-based budget, what that's going to do over time is you're going to realize, hey, I really only have this amount of money. And you start to plan and think about, okay, well, how can I make this money work most effectively? And then, over time, you just naturally start to build up an emergency fund, because you only get to work with the money that you have, but eventually you realize, oh man, I've got to start saving some money so that I can think about what's coming next month with the money that I have right now. It's a really, really great way of budgeting, I think, if you have very little experience with controlling your finances. So again, it corrects bad spending habits. It gives you a reality check on your finances. That's the first thing that's going to happen. That when you first start a zero-based budget, you're going to get this total reality check that you are living well above your means. Unless you're a smart person and you just start from the very beginning of your life with a zero-based budget, which I would encourage you to do, but it can be tough. These other budgets, they don't really change our habits, right? We continue to do these mental gymnastics. Furthermore, they always assume that our income will continue, and maybe you're in a secure job and you're thinking, well, my income will always continue. I'm a doctor, a nurse, I'm in the medical field, and you're thinking like, man, pandemic right now, all these people must be employed. But the truth is that right now there are nurses that have been furloughed or partially furloughed because their specialty doesn't have anything to do with handling a pandemic. There are lots of formerly what we thought were critical jobs that don't seem so critical right now. The most essential people on this planet right now are medical professionals, chemists and epidemiologists, grocery workers, food delivery people. These people that are keeping the world running right now, they're the essential ones, right? And who is essential can fluctuate very quickly. So I think the most powerful part of a zero-based budget is that you never assume your income is going to continue. And these give you far less clarity on how you use your money, and that's why you get into these situations where you're doing those financial mental gymnastics and purchasing things you don't need that you really can't afford. So I highly recommend that zero-based budget. But then again, whatever budget keeps you disciplined and in control of your income, that keeps you saving, right? That keeps you working towards those essential goals of freedom from debt, freedom from work, freedom from external control, that's the one to use for you, okay? A lot of times, these budgets right here are suitable for people that are really mature in their financial processes, right? They've been budgeting hardcore for 25, 30 years. They can just start to let their hair down a little bit and enjoy a looser budget. But, whatever works for you, that's good. Now, last thing I want to talk to you about is a cool app called You Need a Budget. And it is a software tool that I think is a great choice to start your budget and then use for the rest of your life. The reasons I like it is that the software itself is good, but the philosophy and focus of YNAB is totally changing your mindset on how you handle your finances. It's specifically designed so that it gives you control over your income, and there's lots of good tools to help you set savings goals and things like that. Lastly, there's a really great community on Reddit, on their website, through their blog, that's constantly filled with valuable information about how to make your budget even better and how to achieve your financial goals. So what I want to do now for our last video in this series is I'm going to build a budget with You Need a Budget, and you can follow along and understand how a zero-based budget can really change your perspective on money, how it can give you control over your money.